So we talked about a little bit in the last video about win conditions. I said I'd get more in depth into what a win condition is, and that is what this video is going to be all about. Now, when I talk about win cons or win conditions, shortened to win con, there's typically two ways to look at it. Number one, what is kind of like your most, how does your deck win in general? And then number two comes down to actual matchups. So part one is the deck building phase, and then part two would be more your matchups and how you interact with other decks. What's your win condition against versus certain decks? That's the two types of win cons we talk about usually when we talk about Duel Links duels. Now, I'm using Harpies as an example because it's a deck a lot of people have or know a lot of, so it's just a good example to use in this scenario. Looking at Harpies specifically, what is the win condition of Harpies, right? What is the primary way this deck wins? If I had to establish how, I would say establish your boss monster, Cyber/Harpy Lady, and then back her up with spells and traps to protect her, to activate her effect, just to disrupt your opponent, to then swarm the board with your Elegant Egotist and your oracles and everything like that, to either use an Exceed toolkit or just straight up beat down your opponent, right? So consistency of summoning your boss monster, disruption of your opponent's plays, and then swarm of your own monsters to go for lethal. Those are the three kind of key points in this deck to win a duel, right? So when we're deck building, we're trying to build around those three principles into how to win, right? So, this version of the build, for example, is 20 cards versus 30 cards. So if I'm focusing on just that, I want to make sure I boost the consistency. I want to go down to 20 cards. I want to make sure, that I'm playing something like Harpy's Hunting Ground to deal with back row whenever I'm summoning a lot of monsters. I'm using traps like TTH, Fiendish Chain, so the TTH doesn't get, disrupted. Having extra deck monsters, making like Steel Swarm Roach and Sin and all these different tool sets for once I swarm the board. That's kind of what I'm building towards, right? I'm not going to randomly put, a Blue Eyes card in here because that doesn't help me with any of those win cons, so it shouldn't be in my deck, right? Power of the Guardian doesn't help me do anything like that, so it really has no place in my deck, right? If you look at all my cards, they're all Harpy cards. They all interact with each other. There's a bunch of consistency cards in here, and then there's a bunch of disruption cards, right? All these cards, they're designed to make my boss monster, to swarm from my Exceed deck, or to disrupt my opponent. I keep core to my win cons. Now, when we're talking about our opponent, this is where things kind of change a little bit. So, for example, if I'm against Shiranui and I see Endless Trap Hell, my win condition is immediately going to switch to control the back row. Control the back row, and I'm guaranteed to win, right? Control the back row and make sure to save a bounce for any crazy synchro monster that comes out so I don't die, right? Versus something like Thunder Dragon. If I encounter Thunder Dragon, well, there's not going to be that much back row, so let's get Steel Swarm Roach out as soon as possible to try and control my opponent, or TGs or something like that. Bring out Steel Swarm Roach as soon as possible. My priority is no longer summoning the Harpy/Lady. Now it's the Steel Swarm Roach. So that's where your matchup knowledge comes up into play. Knowing when and where to effectively apply your cards to achieve said win strategy, right? And that's just something that comes with playing the game. The first part is definitely something more you can kind of figure out as without really playing that much. You can kind of study and figure out like what a deck wants to do, right? So for example, Blue Eyes White Dragon is another very popular deck to use as an example. Blue Eyes White Dragon wants to get the White Stone of Legend into the graveyard to summon Blue Eyes. That's why discard traps are so good, right? Because that's a good way to send cards to the graveyard without having to interact with your opponent too much. That's why they play so many Karma Cuts, Raigeki Breaks, cards like that for the most part. So that part is simple. But then the second part is more, that's where you got to kind of play the game, watch the streams, and kind of figure out how other decks work in order to effectively use, you know, the matchup win condition. Because for the way you'd play versus Thunder Dragon is not the same way you'd play versus Six Samurai, for example, right? I know Six Samurai has dual wield. You're going to try your absolute best not to play into dual wield, and, you know, not to trigger your Elegant Egotist under Shien to lose it or anything like that. You know, you may want to potentially go into Malevolent Sin, for example, right? So a very common play is there's a you know, there's like a Shien on board. Well, if you could establish your channeler with your Oracle or something and go into Malevolent Sin, well, now I can banish the Shien, swing directly, and I'm officially stronger than Shien can ever be. Which now you're in a better place to win the game instead of, you know, try and make Harpy Slash set 3 back row and then get dual wielded and immediately lose the game. You know, it's not something you want to do. You know what I mean? But that is pretty much, you know, the low and dirty of what a win condition is. If you have individual questions of what should I focus on in my deck, what should I focus on in this matchup in my deck, that is when you head up to the Discord and you ask the new player helpers, or you just ask someone in general, see if anyone's willing to help you down in the new player help channel, and they can provide and tell you, you know, X deck does Y, or Y deck does X, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't have to be Harpies. It could be TGs, you know, TGs, summon Halberd Cannon, that's the win con, right? If you get that, you win the game type of scenario. Because it'll help your deck building, and it'll help your individual games that you have in the ranked ladder. So that's going to be it from me. Another Rise advice video for you. A little bit of a quicker one. I have a lot more of these to make and put out as the weeks go on, so definitely keep an eye out on them. If there's anything that you would like to see specifically, leave a comment down in the comments below. And, you know, the best ones, I'll just take a look through the best ones. I'll make a video out of them. And that's pretty much it. Join the Discord, subscribe on the YouTube. Did you know most of our viewers aren't even subscribed? Let's change that. Everyone, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, boys. Till next time. See ya.